Marcus Chen stared at the gleaming sign outside the rehabilitation center, his jaw clenched with familiar frustration. Innovative wellness solutions, it promised in elegant silver letters. He'd heard similar promises before, each one followed by weeks of generic exercises, patronizing encouragement, and ultimately minimal improvement. His left hand gripped the walking cane tighter than necessary, knuckles white against the polished wood. 6 months ago, he'd been climbing scaffolding on the Morrison building project when a support beam gave way. The fall had compressed too. Vertebrae left him with nerve damage that radiated pain through his left leg and lower back. The doctors called it manageable with proper treatment. Marcus called it hell. The waiting room was different from the sterile medical facilities he'd grown accustomed to. Soft lighting filtered through large windows. Instead of harsh fluorescent bulbs, warm lamps created pools of comfort throughout the space. Plants lined the windowsills, and the chairs actually looked comfortable rather than utilitarian. Still, Marcus chose to stand near the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass like tears he refused to shed. "Mr. Chen," a voice called from behind him. He turned to see a woman approaching, not in the typical clinical uniform he expected, but in comfortable dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that somehow made her seem more approachable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her eyes held something he hadn't seen in other therapists, genuine curiosity rather than practiced sympathy. "I'm Dr. Vivian Torres," she said, extending her hand. "But please, call me Vivian. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Marcus shook her hand briefly, noting how she didn't comment on his grip strength or make any immediate observations about his posture like the others had. "Another miracle worker, I suppose," he said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Instead of the defensive response he expected, Vivian smiled. "Actually, I'm more interested in what you think. Might help. Most of my colleagues focus on fixing what's broken, but I've found that people usually know what they need. They just need someone to listen." This caught Marcus off guard. In 6 months of therapy, no one had asked what he thought might work. They'd poked, prodded, prescribed, and planned, but never simply asked. He followed her down a hallway lined with photographs, not the typical medical charts and anatomical diagrams, but images of people in motion. Dancers, athletes, children playing, elderly couples walking hand in hand. "Tell me about before," Vivian said as they entered a spacious room that felt more like a comfortable living room than a therapy space. "What did your body feel like when it was working the way you wanted it to?" Marcus paused, his prepared speech about symptoms and limitations suddenly feeling inadequate. No one had asked him to remember what feeling good was like. He only wanted to catalog what hurt. For a moment he could almost feel the satisfaction of climbing to the top of a building under construction, surveying the city spread out below, his muscles strong and reliable beneath him. "It felt like home," he said quietly, surprising himself with the honesty. "Like I belonged in my own skin." Vivian nodded, settling into a chair across from him. "Then that's where we'll start finding your way home again." Time and months, Marcus felt something stir in his chest that wasn't pain or frustration. It was small and fragile, but unmistakably real, the faintest whisper of hope. Dr. Vivian Torres watched Marcus enter the therapy room for their 3rd session, noting the subtle changes in his posture. The rigid defensiveness was still there, but something had shifted. He no longer scanned the room like he was looking for escape routes. "How was your week?" she asked, settling into her usual chair. Marcus lowered himself carefully into the seat across from her. The same. Pain, frustration, more pain. But his tone lacked the sharp edge it had carried during their first meeting. Vivian nodded then. Did something unexpected. She pulled her left pant leg up slightly, revealing a surgical scar that ran from her ankle to midcalf. 3 years ago, I fell 40 feet while rock climbing, she said quietly. Shattered my ankle, tore ligaments, broke my fibula in 2 places. Marcus's eyes widened. He'd assumed she was one of those naturally gifted people who'd never experienced real physical trauma. For 8 months, I couldn't walk without crutches, Vivian continued. I became a patient in the same kind of facility where I'd been working as a therapist. Suddenly, All my professional knowledge felt useless when I was the one struggling to put weight on my foot. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was losing faith. In my own body, I'd built my entire identity around being strong, capable, always moving. When that was taken away, I didn't know who I was anymore. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. How did you get through it? I had to learn that. Healing isn't just about rebuilding what was broken, Vivian said. Sometimes it's about discovering parts of yourself that you never knew existed. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Kim, taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. She stood and moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small wooden box. Inside were photographs of her climbing adventures before the accident and others from her recovery journey. These are from my first climb after the accident, she said, showing him a photo of herself on a rock face, her face a mixture of terror and determination. I was shaking so badly that my belaying partner almost called it off. But you did it. Did it, but not because I'd returned to who I was before. I did it because I'd become someone new, someone who understood that strength includes acknowledging when you need help. Marcus studied the photographs, seeing something in her post-accident. Climbing pictures that hadn't been there before. A depth, awareness that spoke of hard-won wisdom. During my recovery, Dr. Kim used techniques that went beyond traditional physical therapy, Vivian continued. She helped me understand that trauma doesn't just live in our muscles and bones. It lives in our nervous system, our breath, our ability to trust. Real healing requires us to address all of these elements. She moved closer, settling on the edge of the coffee table between them. Marcus, I want to try something different with you. Something that might feel uncomfortable at first, but has the potential to create the breakthrough you've been looking for. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of something? Trauma-informed bodywork combined with emotional release techniques, Vivian explained, involves working with your nervous system to help it remember how to feel safe in your body again. But it requires complete trust between us. Trust that I'll respect your boundaries. And trust from me that you'll communicate honestly about what you're experiencing. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. The rational part of his mind wanted to dismiss this as New Age nonsense, but something deeper recognized the truth in what she was saying. His body had indeed forgotten how to feel safe. Even simple movements now carried the fear of pain, the memory of that terrible moment when everything had gone wrong. What would that look like? He asked carefully. Vivian's expression grew serious. It would mean being willing to be vulnerable in ways that might feel scary. It would mean trusting me to guide you through experiences that could bring up difficult emotions. And it would mean accepting that healing sometimes requires us to feel things we've been avoiding. She paused, studying his face. I won't pressure you to decide now, but I want you to know that in my experience, the people who make the most profound recoveries are the ones who are willing to go beyond the surface level. Marcus looked out the window at the city beyond, thinking about the building projects he used to oversee. The satisfaction of creating something solid and lasting from raw materials. Maybe healing worked the same way. Sometimes you had to break things down completely before you could rebuild them stronger. I need time to think about it, he said finally. Vivian smiled. Of course, trust isn't something that can be rushed. But Marcus? She waited until he met her eyes. You've already taken the hardest step by being here. Whatever you decide, I'm honored that you're allowing me to be part of your journey. As Marcus left that day, he carried with him the image of Vivian on that rock face. Not fearless, but afraid and climbing anyway. For the first time since his accident, he began to wonder what his own version of that climb might look like. Grace Nakamura was arranging art supplies when Marcus arrived for what Vivian had described as a collaborative session. The room was different today, larger, with natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and easels positioned throughout the space. Marcus, I'd like you to meet Grace, Vivian said as they entered. She's going to be joining us today for something a little different. Grace turned from her setup, and Marcus immediately noticed the subtle hearing aid in her left ear. She approached, with a warm smile, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. I've heard wonderful things about your progress, she said. her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had learned to navigate the world with partial hearing loss. Grace specializes in somatic art therapy, Vivian explained. She helps people express and process trauma through creative movement and visual art. After my climbing accident, working with her was what finally helped me break through the emotional barriers that were preventing my physical healing. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. I should mention that I have zero artistic ability. I'm an architect. I work with blueprints and measurements, not ... whatever this is. Grace laughed, a sound that seemed to fill the entire room. Perfect. The best sessions happen with people who think they can't do art. You spend less time worrying about the result and more time experiencing the process. She guided them to a section of the room where large sheets of paper were spread across the floor, with containers of finger paints, brushes, and other materials nearby. We're going to start with something called body mapping, Grace explained. It's a way of exploring how trauma and healing show up in our physical form. Vivian sat cross-legged on the floor beside one of the papers, already rolling up her sleeves. The goal isn't to create something beautiful, she said. Your body express things that words can't capture. Marcus lowered himself carefully to the floor, his back protesting the unfamiliar position. Grace knelt beside him, her movements fluid despite what Marcus assumed must be balance challenges related to her hearing loss. Close your eyes, Grace instructed softly. I want you to scan your body from head to toe. Don't judge what you find, just notice. Where do you feel tension? Where do you feel openness? Where do you feel nothing at all? Marcus had been taught to avoid focusing on his body's sensations, to distract himself from pain. This felt dangerous, like deliberately pressing on a bruise. But he closed his eyes and began the internal journey Grace had suggested. His shoulders carried tension like stone. His lower back felt like a storm system, unpredictable and threatening. But surprisingly, his hands felt warm and alive. And there was a spot in his chest that felt curious, not painful, not numb, but genuinely interested in what might happen next, Grace said. Without opening your eyes, reach for whatever. Colors call to you. Let your body choose, not your mind. Marcus's hands moved almost without his conscious direction, finding cool blues and warm yellows, deep purples and soft greens. When Grace finally told him to open his eyes, he was surprised to find that he'd been painting for nearly 20 minutes, creating swirling patterns that seemed to map the landscape of his internal experience. Tell me about what you've created, Grace said, settling beside him with her own painting, a complex image that seemed to shift between abstract and representational. Marcus studied his work. I see. Storms and calm spaces. Places where everything is tangled up and other places that feel ... hopeful, I guess. Where in your body do you feel those storms? Vivian asked, having created her own artistic map nearby. Marcus placed his hand on his lower back, then his shoulders. Here. And here. Grace nodded knowingly. Trauma often gets trapped in the places where we hold ourselves up, our spine, our shoulders, the places that carry the weight of our world. But look at your painting again. What else do you see? Marcus looked more closely. Among the storm patterns, there were small pockets of gold and warm orange, tiny spaces where the colors seemed to dance rather than clash. There are bright spots, small ones, but they're there. Those are your body's wisdom, Grace said. The parts of you that remember how to heal, even when your mind doesn't believe it's possible. She reached for a different set of materials, soft pastels and blending tools. Now I want you to focus on those bright spots. Make them bigger. Give them room to grow. As Marcus worked, something unexpected happened. The focused attention on the hopeful parts of his internal landscape seemed to quiet the storm areas. His lower back, which had been sending sharp signals of distress, began to feel less urgent in its demands for attention. This is what I discovered after my car accident, Grace said, working alongside him. I lost 40% of my hearing in my left ear, and for months, I only focused on what I'd lost. But when I started exploring what remained, the way I could feel music through vibrations, how visual art became more vivid when I wasn't distracted by perfect sound, I found abilities I'd never known I had. She gestured to her hearing aid. This doesn't restore my hearing, but it taught me that healing doesn't always mean going back to exactly who you were before. Sometimes it means becoming a more complete version of yourself. Vivian, who had been quietly working on her own piece, looked up. Grace was the one who taught me that vulnerability could be a superpower rather than a weakness. Trying to hide my limitations and started exploring what they could teach me, everything changed. Marcus set down his pastels and looked at what he'd created. The storm patterns were still there, but they'd been joined by flowing streams of gold, an orange that seemed to offer paths through the chaos. It wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but it felt true, an honest representation of his internal landscape. I never thought of my injury as potentially offering me anything, he said slowly. I've only seen it as something that took things away. Grace smiled, her hands moving in an expressive gesture that needed no words. What if it's both? What if it took away some things but made space for others? As they cleaned up their materials, Marcus found himself moving with less caution, less protection. The session had somehow taught his nervous system that not all new experiences led to pain. Some led to discovery. Walking to his car afterward, he realized that for the first time in months, he felt genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. James Rivera found his brother sitting on the apartment balcony, staring out at the city skyline with an expression James had never seen before, peaceful but alert, like someone standing at the edge of a diving board, calculating the jump. "You missed dinner again," James said, settling into the chair beside Marcus. As a paramedic, he'd become expert at reading people's physical and emotional states, and something about Marcus felt different, less brittle, more present. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off the horizon, "about what Vivian and Grace had been telling me, about trust and vulnerability and all that." James waited. 6 months ago, Marcus would have dismissed such concepts as therapeutic nonsense. The fact that he was even considering them represented a seismic shift. "She wants to try something new," Marcus continued. "A deeper kind of therapy. Something that would require me to... ... He paused, searching for words to completely let my guard down. "And you're scared," James observed. It wasn't a question. Marcus finally looked at his younger brother. Seeing the familiar combination of protectiveness and frustration that had defined their relationship since childhood, James had always been the one to rush toward danger while Marcus calculated risks and planned careful routes to success. The accident had reversed their roles in ways that neither of them had fully processed. "I'm terrified," Marcus admitted. "But I'm also tired, James. Tired of carrying all this pain, all this fear. Tired of being half alive." James leaned forward, his paramedic instincts kicking in. "What exactly is she proposing?" Marcus shifted. In his chair, his body language revealing the internal conflict he was wrestling with. "She calls it trauma-informed bodywork. It involves removing the emotional and physical barriers that prevent healing, complete vulnerability, complete trust." James was quiet for a long moment, processing this information through his medical training and his deep knowledge of his brother's psychology. "Marcus, you've been burned before. Remember Dr. Patterson and his revolutionary techniques that set your progress back 3 months?" "This is different," Marcus said, and the conviction in his voice surprised them both. "Vivian isn't selling me false promises. She's offering me something harder, the chance to do the work that terrifies me most." James studied his brother's face, seeing something there that had been missing since the accident. Genuine hope. Not the desperate kind that grasps at any possibility, but the grounded kind that's willing to do whatever it takes. "Tell me about her," James said. "What makes you trust her?" Marcus smiled for the first time in their conversation. "She doesn't try to fix me. She doesn't promise that everything will go back to the way it was before. She just... ... sees me. All of me. The broken parts, the scared parts, the parts that still remember how to hope." He pulled out his phone and showed James a photo from the art therapy session, his body map with its storms and bright spots. "Look at this. 3 months ago, I couldn't even acknowledge that there were any bright spots. I was so focused on protecting myself from more pain that I couldn't see the places where healing was already happening."
Oh.
James examined the image, his medical eye noting the psychological breakthrough it represented. "You created this. With Grace's help?" And Marcus's voice grew stronger. For 2 hours, I wasn't thinking about my back or my leg or what I couldn't do anymore. I was just ... present. In my body, in the moment, connected to something larger than my pain. The brothers sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set over the city. James had responded to thousands of emergency calls, had seen people, at their most vulnerable and their most resilient, recognized the signs of someone preparing for a crucial fight, not against an external enemy, but against their own limitations. "What does this deeper therapy involve exactly?" James asked. Marcus took a deep breath. "I don't know all the details yet. Vivian says it's different for everyone, tailored to what each person needs to feel safe enough to heal completely. It requires absolute trust. Trust that she'll respect my boundaries. Trust that I'll communicate honestly about what I'm experiencing. Trust that the process will lead somewhere worth going." James nodded slowly. As a first responder, he understood the life-or-death importance of trust between people in crisis. "And you think you're ready for that level of trust?" "I think I'm ready to find out," Marcus said. "The alternative is staying. Where I am, and James, I can't do that anymore. Won't do that anymore." James reached over and gripped his brother's shoulder. "And I'm with you. Whatever you need, someone to talk through it, someone to drive you home afterward, someone to help you process whatever comes up. I'm here." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd been carrying, not just since the accident, but for years before it. Having his brother's unconditional support, his recognition that this was a battle worth fighting, gave him the final piece of courage he needed. "I'm going to call her tomorrow," Marcus said. "I'm going to tell her yes," as the city lights began to twinkle below them. Both brothers felt the weight of the decision settling around them. Tomorrow, Marcus would take the biggest risk of his life, not the physical risk of climbing scaffolding or navigating construction sites, but the emotional risk of complete vulnerability. For the first time since the accident, that risk felt like a doorway rather than a cliff. Luna had been working as a therapy dog for 3 years. She had developed an intuitive understanding of human pain that went beyond anything in her formal training. The golden retriever could sense emotional distress from across a room, could feel the shift in someone's nervous system as they moved from fear to trust. Today, she sensed something different in the therapy room. Dr. Torres was preparing for what she called a breakthrough session, and the energy in the space felt charged. With possibility and terror in equal measure, Marcus arrived early, his usual punctuality now carrying the weight of determined commitment rather than nervous obligation. Luna watched from her bed in the corner as he settled into the comfortable chair, noting how his breathing was deeper than usual, more intentional. "Are you ready for this?" Vivian asked, settling across from him with the careful attention of someone about to guide another person through their most vulnerable moment. Marcus nodded, then seemed to realize that wasn't quite true. "I'm terrified and ready at the same time. Is that possible? It's the only way real transformation happens," Vivian said softly. "Luna, come here, girl." The golden retriever approached slowly, her tail wagging gently. She'd learned that her role in these breakthrough sessions wasn't to provide distraction or comic relief, but to offer a steady, non-judgmental presence that could help anchor people when they felt most adrift. "Luna is going to help us today," Vivian explained. "Animals have a way of staying present with whatever is happening without trying to fix it or change it. Sometimes that's exactly what we need to feel safe enough to let our guard down completely." Marcus reached out tentatively to pet Luna's soft head, and the dog leaned into his touch with the kind of uncomplicated acceptance that humans spend lifetimes trying to learn. "I want you to start by telling me about the moment everything changed," Vivian said. "Not the medical facts or the timeline we've discussed before, the felt experience. What your body remembers about that day." Marcus closed his eyes, his hand still resting on Luna's head. "I remember the sound of the scaffolding giving way. This terrible groaning of metal under too much weight. And then, falling, not just physically, but this sense of everything I'd built my life on, just ... disappearing." Luna could feel his heart rate accelerating, the familiar pattern of someone approaching traumatic memory. She shifted positions subtly, placing more of her weight against his legs, offering the grounding presence of a warm, living creature who wasn't afraid of his pain. "Where do you feel that in your body right now?" Vivian asked. Marcus's free hand moved to his chest, then his throat. Like everything is collapsing inward. Like I can't breathe deep enough. Stay with that feeling, Vivian guided. Don't try to change it or escape it. Just let it be there. Let Luna help you stay grounded. For the next hour, Vivian guided Marcus through a careful exploration of his trauma, helping him feel and release emotions that had been locked in his nervous system since the accident. Luna remained a steady presence throughout, sometimes placing her head on his lap when the emotions became overwhelming. Other times simply breathing calmly beside him, reminding his system that it was possible to be present with pain without being destroyed by it. The breakthrough came during a moment when Marcus was describing his fear that he would never feel whole again. As he spoke, tears streaming down his face for the first time since the accident. Luna did something she'd never done in a therapy session before. She climbed onto his lap. It's not the tentative half approach she usually used with clients, but a full, confident settling of her 60-pound body across his legs. Her head resting against his chest, her weight distributed in a way that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Marcus looked down at her in amazement. She climbed onto my lap like it was her favorite place to be, he said, his voice filled with wonder. What does that feel like? Vivian asked softly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand stroking Luna's golden fur, his breathing gradually synchronizing with hers. Like I'm still capable of being someone's safe place. Like maybe the broken parts of me don't disqualify me from connection. Luna could feel the shift in his nervous system, the way his muscles relaxed, the way his breathing deepened, the way his heart rate settled into a calmer rhythm. She'd provided this service for many clients over the years, but something about this moment felt different. This man wasn't just accepting her presence. He was recognizing something profound about his own capacity for love and connection. She trusts me completely, Marcus continued, his voice filled with awe. She's not worried about my limitations or my pain. She just knows that right here, right now, this is exactly where she wants to be. Vivian smiled, recognizing the moment of integration she'd been guiding Marcus toward. And how does it feel to be trusted like that? Marcus looked up at her, tears still flowing, but his expression transformed. Like remembering who I am underneath all the fear and pain. Like discovering that I'm still fundamentally the same person, who deserves love and connection. Luna settled more deeply into his lap, her presence a living reminder that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that being broken didn't mean being unworthy of love. This is what healing feels like, Marcus said quietly, his realization dawning as he spoke. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of connection despite the pain. As the session concluded, Luna reluctantly climbed down from Marcus's lap, but not before giving him one of her signature gentle kisses on the hand. She'd done her job helping a human remember that they were worthy of unconditional love exactly as they were. Walking to his car afterward, Marcus felt different in his body. Not pain-free, but pain-integrated. Not fixed, but whole. Luna had shown him something that months of traditional therapy hadn't been able to convey. That healing happened not through the elimination of vulnerability, but through the embrace of it. That night, he called James with news that surprised them both. I think I'm ready to start building again. Not the same structures as before, but something new. Something that includes everything I've learned about being broken and being whole. At the same time, for the first time since his accident, Marcus fell asleep, not despite his pain, but with a deep acceptance of all the parts of himself, the broken ones, the healing ones, and the ones that had never been damaged at all.